Welcome, good morning, or good afternoon to everyone, wherever you are. We're going to get started in just about 2 minutes. So, hey, Rox, how are you? I see your smiling face there. Good to see you.
Hey, hey.
Um, hey, Iowa is in the room. I should probably open up the screen so I can see other people who are in the room. Morning, Susan, Mike, Laura, welcome. Stephen, Jan, hey, my friends from Ballard, and Marion Baker, an old friend. Great to have, but not old, a friend of many years. uh, Great. Deb, Eileen, Marvio, Michelle, Eric, welcome. Marianne, Anna, Bradley, Jen, Dory, great to see you. How are you? Rupesh, Sandy, Bradley. Anyway, I won't get to everyone, but great to see all of you. Greg, good to see you. Welcome. Monica, thanks for joining us. Great. So again, we're going to start at the 2 minutes after the hour. We'll get started, but everyone's coming from something else, so it's great to have you all in the room today. So again, we'll give just a couple of minutes. Welcome to everyone. Thanks for giving us a part of your day. We're excited to have you join us for this dialogue and conversation today. Great. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for being here. Rob Labarge, welcome. Haven't seen you in years. Hope you're doing well. And again, I'm sorry, I'm sure there's some other folks I won't get to right away because I'm going to try to kick us off in just about now. So let's get started. I'll only leave the screen up for a minute, then you'll be able to see Jim and I more clearly. But I want to welcome everyone to this really conversation on stepping up in challenging times, a leadership conversation between myself, John Izzo, I'm sure many of you know me, and my good friend and a man I respect a great deal, Jim Kouzes. Now, many of you may know both of us. Some of you may be kind of fans of Jim's work, some of mine, some of both, some of neither, but we welcome you. And I just want to say a word. I have Ainsley from our team, our great head of engagement, who will kind of be running the show today. The chat room is open. Feel free to go in there. Later, we'll open it up for questions that you can either speak into the room or put into the chat box. So we'll leave time for that. Let me say a few words about Jim for those of you not familiar with his work. Jim is the co-author with Barry Posner of the best-selling and award-winning book, The Leadership Challenge, now in its 7th edition with over 2.7 million copies sold. He and Barry, two of the most prolific and best-selling leadership authors of our generation. And they not only write a lot, but they write good stuff. Not always the same. In addition to his writing and speaking, he's an experienced executive of 28 years, having served as president of TPG Learning Systems and the former CEO and chairman of the Tom Peters Company and director of 2 university executive programs. The Wall Street Journal rightly cited him as one of the 12 best executive educators in the United States, and ASTD honored him with the Distinguished Contribution to Workplace Learning and Performance Award. And much earlier in his life, he served in John F. Kennedy's honor guard when Kennedy was inaugurated president of the United States in 1961. What a beautiful moment that must have been to be a part of. So I welcome Jim. He's also an incredible human being, and he and his wife, Tay, are dear friends. So let me just frame today's conversation, then I'll get Jim in and we'll get started. Jim and I have both been writing about leadership for several decades, and today is a time when we need leadership more than ever, and more than ever need people to step up amidst the many challenges that we face, both in business and society, including climate, a pandemic, racial and social inequality, alongside simply the daily challenges of our organization and our careers. Today, we want to explore this idea of how each one of us can step up in challenging times and create an opportunity for others to do so. We're going to have a dialogue with each other, but also invite you into the conversation, both by chatting with each other. Don't be shy to do that in the chat function, and as well as engaging later with us with questions. So let me stop. Oh, and one of the things that inspired us to do this is that, both of us have just written a second edition of my book, Stepping Up, How Taking Responsibility Changes Everything, and Jim's new book coming out in January, Everyday People, Extraordinary Leadership, How to Make a Difference Regardless of Your Position, Role, or Authority. So first of all, Jim, let me just say good morning to you, and just let you just say good morning and good afternoon to everyone.
Well, thank you, John, for that gracious introduction. And it's good to be with you again virtually. And thanks everyone for signing on and being part. And I hope you participate and ask us lots of questions. John and I are here to have a conversation with you, and we look forward to it. So thanks much, and let's get started, John.
Great. So Jim, I want to start by saying you and Barry have been writing about leadership for a long time now, but there's something very unusual about your upcoming book. Unusual meaning in your writing career, because it focuses on leadership not as a position, but really as an opportunity that anyone can have regardless of role or authority. So I'm curious, what motivated you two to write this book, and in a nutshell, what's it about?
Well, thanks, John. Barry and I wrote our first book, The Leadership Challenge, together, and it was published in 1987. And while we're doing the research for that, one of the premises of that book, The Leadership Challenge, was that leadership was something that was everyone's business. At the time, as you may recall, there was In Search of Excellence and other books written, Theory Z, Theory Y, lots of other books about Japanese management, everyone talking about the corporation and leadership at the top of organizations. And Barry and I wanted to do research that talked about leadership that was at the front line and in the middle. And one of the things we said in that book was that leadership was everyone's business. It wasn't the private reserve of a few charismatic individuals. It wasn't about birthright. It wasn't about position. It wasn't about DNA. It was a set of skills and abilities that was accessible and available to everyone. We followed that with a book on student leadership. And so we were talking about leaders not in formal positions when we were talking about students. But a couple of years ago, one of our colleagues, Valerie Willis, said to us, you guys keep talking about leadership as everyone's business. You ought to write a book about that. And we said, Valerie, you're absolutely right. And we decided to engage in collecting cases just from individuals who were either in the community or inside organizations, didn't have a title, weren't in a formal position, but stepped up, to use your term, initiated leadership in their community or their organizations. We've also, since the very beginning of the Leadership Challenge book writing and research on leadership that we've done, also looked at leader role models. And another thing that motivated us to write this book was to clearly communicate that, in fact, when you ask people who their most important leader role models are, they aren't, in fact, people in positions of authority with titles. They are, number one category is family members are the most important leader role models in people's lives, whether you're 50 or 80 or 18. When asked who is your most important leader role model in your life, people say it was a family member, more frequently than not a parent. So all of that data suggested to us that this book was an important book to write. So what distinguishes this particular book from our others? It's still about the 5 practices of exemplary leadership, but we've taken our data, we've looked exclusively at data about people who are not in formal positions, would be considered individual contributors inside an organization, and also written stories and cases just about those individuals.
Wonderful. That's great. And, as you know, it's something that I, share, that passion for. I often say, to me, the best definition of leadership is a leader is anyone who has a positive influence on others around them. Or another way I like to put it more colloquially is there are two kinds of people in the world. There are people who make the room better when they come in, and there are people who make the room better when they leave. And that's not about position. There are people who have leader on their business card who make the room worse when they come in. And there's people who have very, quote, lowly positions in an organization or no position at all, who make the room better when they come in and have that kind of positive influence on others.
Well, and I think, John, the one thing that distinguishes leaders as individual contributors who are leaders from individual contributors who are simply doing their job really well. And you can have a lot of influence as an individual contributor and do your job really well. But what distinguishes leaders as individual contributors is that they have some vision of the future, some aspiration, some goal that they want to take people toward. So they want to make a change, and they want to get other people involved in that change. And that requires a different set of skills than simply influencing somebody to do something, which is the job that they're assigned. And so, John, you asked me about the leadership challenge, and you asked me about our new book, Everyday People, Extraordinary Leadership. What motivated you to write the second edition? You've never done this before, second edition of one of your books.
No, I never. I'm kind of person, I'm kind of done with, when I'm done something, like I figure I've said what I need to say to the world, why say it again, right? But you've taught me the value of, I think, with your own book on the leadership challenge of doing that. But I really, wasn't intending to do it. And then this last year, beginning probably the end of last year, I really felt like this idea of stepping up, of taking full responsibility, of each one of us being the agent of change, was more needed than ever in society and in organizations. And, I won't be political, but I think few would argue with the statement I'm about to make, which is, if you don't think taking responsibility matters, think about the impact of the leader of the most powerful nation in the world, pretty much blaming everyone but himself for the fact that he lost an election. And that there's millions of people getting excited about someone not taking responsibility. And I mean that not as a political statement, it's more you probably know my bachelor degree was in sociology. So as a sociologist, I'm fascinated by our attraction to not taking responsibility as opposed to stepping up. And the thing is that also, when I wrote the book, it was more theoretical, like how do you get people in that place of stepping up? And then over the last 10 years, we've worked with several hundred organizations, getting them to implement those things. And I see Roxanne on the screen here, who was one of the leaders of our team that worked with Qantas Airlines, putting 20,000 people through a stepping up program. And we learned so much about how you actually do that, how leaders create that environment for stepping up. And also, what does it mean moment to moment to take responsibility and be in a place of agency? So I just felt like there was more to say about what we learned over this last decade, and then to refresh it with new stories of people who had stepped up, who hadn't stepped up, when I wrote the book 10 years ago. So it was really a lot of fun to rewrite it. And so thanks for asking, but it was, and again, I just felt it was more important than ever that people took responsibility and acted like agents of change in their lives.
Yeah, well, John, after 6 editions, now working on the 7th edition of Leadership Challenge, I guess Barry and I feel we never quite get it right, so we always have to keep redoing it. But and bringing it up to date, of course.
It's true.
Hey, Jim, and it's often, yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So obviously, we titled this Stepping Up in Challenging Times. We are living in a variety of ways an unprecedented moment in human history, and maybe an unprecedented time, because I don't think it's just the pandemic. To me, there's been like a building over the last decade or a couple of decades of division, of competition for business that's unprecedented, of disruption in business, of accelerating crises like climate change, social justice. I'm curious from your perspective, why is it such an important time for individuals to be in a place of agency around leadership in whatever position you may or may not have? Why is it so important that we talk about this now?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, John, I think it's very coincidental that you called your book Stepping Up. And we're talking about stepping up in challenging times in the relationship to leadership. I'm a kind of an amateur etymologist, and one of the things that I love to do is look up words. And if you look up lead in the dictionary, you'll find that it's defined, its origin, word origin, comes from the words go, travel, and guide. Go, travel, guide. And leadership really is all about stepping out and then stepping up. It's all about taking people to places they've never been before. And I think the critical difference, again, about what's the difference between individual contributors and leaders who are individual contributors is that they want to guide other people in that direction. They want to get others involved and engaged with them on a journey to a place they've never been before. And of course, now, because of the pandemic, the social justice, the diversity, the equity and inclusion issues, and of course, then the economic issues that have accompanying the pandemic, we are all asked to do things we've never done before. I mean, I don't know when you, where previously in your life you wore a mask for 9 months. I certainly haven't. We're being asked to adopt new behaviors. We're being asked to socially distance. We're being asked to use technology like the ones we're currently using. So we're being invited, and in some cases required, to do things we've never done before. In order to get a consistency in that kind of behavior, it requires leadership. And just as an example, one of the stories in our new book, Everyday People, Extraordinary Leadership, Aaron Byrne McElroy in a Midwestern city outside of Chicago, Illinois, found herself in March of this year, sitting on her couch at home, as she describes it, wondering what she can do, because she was always involved in her community. She was always involved at work. She didn't have a formal position in which to do something, but she was just troubled by what was happening to the first responders and frontline workers in her small town. And she was worried about the people in the restaurant business and local businesses and how they were going to make a living. And so she decided to step out and step up, and she contacted 4 of her friends with whom she'd worked with in various community activities over the years in her town. And she got a project called Project Frontline going in the community, where she invited restaurants and restaurant suppliers, people who, farmers and others who supplied food, to sign up to provide meals to first responders and to individuals who were in long-term care facilities who couldn't go out to shop for themselves. And so she organized a community effort to make that happen. That's leadership. And nobody required her to do it. She just chose to do it. She took the initiative. And there are probably more stories of leaders not in positions of authority who've taken actions like that during these difficult times than there are of leaders in positions of authority, because there are just more of us.
Yeah, and when you're saying that, I was thinking that 2 things came to mind. One is Arthur Ashe, the great tennis player, said, to achieve greatness, you must start where you are and do what you can. And I think one of the wonderful things about stepping up and taking leadership, regardless of position and without permission, is it puts you in a place of power. And when you ask, what can I do? Which is one of our big themes around our stepping up work. And I think of one of the news stories in my book I love the most is a young man outside of 2 hours out of St. Louis, who, when the the George Floyd situation happened in Minneapolis, and the riots and the protests started across the country, he decided, well, in his relatively small city in rural Missouri, there needed to be a protest, and no one was a young black man, and he organized that himself. But what's really interesting is one of the first acts he did was he made an appointment, even though just a college student in town, with the police chief in his city. And he said, I'm organizing a kind of a protest to stand up, with George Floyd, and it's a white police chief in that city. And I'm wondering if you would walk at the front of the protest with me, which he did. And I just thought it's such a beautiful story of just a young man saying, yeah, they're doing this in St. Louis, but something needs to happen here. And it seems to me that, it's an old yarn, but like there are two things you can say when you think about acting. The first is, why me? And the more important thing is, well, why not me? If not me, who? Right? And so I just love those stories of people who just said, that. And to me, it ultimately, you just feel so powerful when you take action, whether it solves the problem or not.
Well, John, just to follow on that, one of the things we discovered in our research, for those who are not familiar, one of the ways we start our research and continue to do this to this day, is we ask people to tell us a story about their personal best leadership experience. So we might think about a time when each of us on this call was doing our personal best. And what were we doing? And we asked that question. And one of the things that we also ask is, what was the context? What was the situation? Not just what did you do, but paint a picture of the context in which just happened. You just talked about a social justice issue and the George Floyd murder, and and Aaron talked about the pandemic and that context. And one of the interesting things is, if you look at hundreds, now thousands in our case, of those stories, is you find that challenge is the consistent denominator in all of those cases. And so one of the insights that came to us is that people do their best when they're challenged. We don't do our best when we just want to keep things the same. It doesn't bring out the best of us. And you talked about people feeling more powerful when they step up and step out to a challenge. And that's true in leadership as well. Challenge is the context in which leadership is demanded. And when people step up to that in times of adversity, they have a greater opportunity of doing their personal best, as well as having an impact on others. And so I think it's not coincidental that both of us are writing about this right now, because the times require it.
It's true. Yeah. And that, back to that Arthur Ashe quote, the first act of leadership is to do what you can where you are, in the room that you're in right now.
Yeah.
Right. It's like Peter Block, who I know both of us probably, admire Peter a lot. I love Peter. There's this little, like, almost Zen riddle. Where does change begin? It begins in this room. Why? Because this is the room I'm in. When does it begin? It begins now. Why? Because this is the only moment that I can make a different decision than I did the moment before. With whom does it change? It changes with me, because I'm the only one I can control. And so it's like you really begin to think about that. So Jim, I want to invite people to ask us some questions in a moment, but I want to ask, obviously both of us have written about formal leadership a lot over the years. And we're now talking about how people, both in business, and I know both of us have a lot of stories in the books that are around people stepping up in the business side, not just the society side, is that if you could only choose one thing that leaders do that gets in the way of people stepping up and taking leadership without position in an organization, and one thing they do that facilitates it, what would you choose? One thing they do that gets in the way, and one thing that would facilitate more stepping up and taking leadership?
Well, one of the things that, well, let me start with a story. When I was with Santa Clara University, we were working on another edition of our book. We got a little email from, we'll call her Jane Blake. That's not a real name. She said we could tell her story, but we didn't. She didn't want us to use her name. Jane wrote us this little note, and she said, "You know, I have my bachelor's degree, and I'm now working on a master. I have 2 bachelor's degrees, and I'm now working on my master's degree. And one of the classes I'm taking is on leadership. I'm in class with people who are military officers and business executives and government officials, and I am only, and I'm quoting her here, a mother, grandmother, and coal miner's daughter. I'm only a mother, grandmother, and coal miner's daughter. And I didn't believe that I could lead like those other people were leading. But she said, after I learned to lead in this class, I realized that I too can become a leader someday. And I think the greatest barrier to our leading, anyone leading, is self-belief or self-doubt. Well, I'm not in a position of leadership. I don't have the authority to do it. I'm not powerful. I don't have a lot of resources. I don't see myself as a leader. That is the greatest barrier for each of us stepping up and stepping out, is that self-image. So Tay and I, my wife Tay and I, whom you know, and Barry did some research on one set of beliefs, which Carol Dweck has developed on mindset, looked at people's beliefs about whether beliefs are fixed or whether essentially you have a growth mindset, you're open. Fixed mindset is, you know, what you have is what you got. You can't change yourself or anyone else's behavior. And growth mindset, and I'm simplifying here, but growth mindset is we're capable of growing and growing and learning over time. So we took a look, we used her scale, Carol Dweck's scale. She's at Stanford University, and we used her scale measuring growth and fixed. And then we related them to the 5 practices of exemplary leadership. And one of the things that we discovered was those leaders, those individuals who have a growth mindset exhibit our 5 practices of exemplary leadership, exhibit exemplary leadership behaviors significantly more frequently than those with a fixed mindset. So if you don't believe that you can change yourself or anyone, you can't. But if you believe that people grow over time, people can learn, even when they currently aren't capable of doing something, that they can grow and develop, you will have a greater probability of having an influence on others in a positive direction. So I think that's the greatest barrier. What about you? What do you think is
well, you know,
biggest?
First of all, I want to validate what you said. One of my, as you know, stepping up came out of these interviews that I did with people who had stepped up. And I asked CEOs, who stepped up in your organization? And we found these people who stepped up in a whole variety of ways. And so what do we learn from these stories? And one of my favorite chapters is only naive people ever change the world. Because we found out that the first thing was an incredible belief that you could change things. And when we surveyed several thousand people and asked them, why don't they step up more to take leadership? The number one answer was, I'm only one person. I can't change things. And so this first belief in your own power, the belief in your own capability, and I guess what I would add to what you said, Jim, is that I think as leaders, you know, I think whether it's purpose or culture, and I knew you'd agree with this, storytelling is the oil in the engine of corporate culture. And I believe when leaders tell stories of people taking action, taking initiative, even if they're well-intentioned failures. One of the problems we do is we only highlight the massive success. And we know from Carol Dweck's research that when people are praised for effort, not just results, they're more likely to take more risk in the future. And so do we regularly tell stories and feature stories of people who had the faith to step up and try and change something, whether it was a customer process, something in the business, or take a risk. And so I think that creating an environment for that kind of rich storytelling is one of the things that does that. And we have to also have those stories where we tried and we weren't completely successful. So we really have that sense that it's okay to try, even if you don't get successful the first time. Because the other thing we discovered in our research is that almost all the people who stepped up to make a difference talked about the role of setbacks. And how do you respond when you step up and it doesn't lead to change?
Yeah.
Do you regroup and try new things, or do you get discouraged?
Yeah, well, one of the things that is absolutely essential for organizations to function, for teams to be effective, is what Amy Edmondson's called psychological safety.
Mm-hmm.
And psychological safety is absolutely essential for team effectiveness and for building trust in organizations. And part of that is a sense that if I make a mistake, I won't be punished for it, yet we'll use it as a learning experience. Now, of course, you can't make the same mistake over and over again and not expect some kind of negative consequence. Right. But the sense that if I take a risk in service of some larger, greater purpose, and I try to do something new because it's required right now to do something differently than we've ever done before, it's an experiment. We know what happens when we experiment. We make mistakes. If I feel that if I do that, I can, and someone's there to catch me if I fall, if I make a mistake, and we use it as a learning opportunity, people are much more likely to do that. And so that's one of the requirements inside an organization, is to create a context of psychological safety. But there's one other thing I'd add, John, and I think this is really, really, really important. The average age at which most people get leadership development training, the average age get formal leader development, is 41 years old. Some of the research shows it's about 38, but somewhere in that band is when we get formal leadership development. And that's 10 years, typically 10 years after people in managerial roles have started to supervise other people. Would you go to a doctor or a dentist or a lawyer who hadn't gotten any formal training until 10 years after they'd been practicing?
No.
Obviously, we wouldn't.
No.
Why is it
not
that
on purpose anyway?
Why is it that we expect people to do a better job at leading when we don't formally develop them in those roles until much later in their careers? Yeah. It's absolutely essential that we start developing leaders much earlier. Today, executives inside organizations will tell you that they want leadership development to be begun by age 21. That means you've got to at least start it when people are in college, if not before, college, university, if not before.
You know, Jim, so, you maybe go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say we also need to take responsibility and step up to the fact that we can't expect to have better leading until we provide better training and development for all those individuals who eventually may move into formal roles. But if we want it throughout the organization, we want it to be everybody's business, and then we need to do it for everyone.
Yeah, you know, and then we're going to open up for questions. I'm going to start with a question someone sent ahead of time, and I'll let you start with this question, Jim. Then I'll check in the chat, and you can either put a question in the chat or you can kind of raise your hand. But Jim, just one quick funny story on that. You know, do we train people to be leaders whether they have that title or not? And I think of a wonderful story. A friend of mine, Michelle, years ago was doing some work with General Dynamics, and she was doing a leadership course on listening. And a guy showed up in overalls who looked kind of out of place in terms of dress, but she didn't think anything. Thought, well, maybe he leads like out on the shop floor or something. And he was very engaged. He was asking questions and just really very engaged. And on the first break, he came up to her and said, "This is the best course they've ever sent me to in this company. I've learned so much in the first hour, but I'm just curious, when does the forklift training begin?" So he had been signed up for forklift training, but he was hungry to learn to be a leader. So I thought it was such a great story. So Jim, somebody sent in this question. I won't say who it is because it's kind of about their organization. says, recently in our organization experienced leaking of information and confidential conversations among colleagues in the media. The general feeling amongst most staff is that this is a betrayal and a breach of trust. The fear is that information is now going to be further restricted and it prevents us from completing our work. I'm curious, what does good leadership look like in this situation going forward? So I'm going to give you a chance to start answering while I check the chat.
Right, John. Well, the questioner is absolutely correct. This is an issue of trust, and it is a betrayal of trust, assuming that that's the norm. I know there are some organizations in which leaking information is part of a strategy, but if it's not part of a strategy and it's the norm that people do not do that, then that person has betrayed a trust. So what we have to ask ourselves, and let's be human beings here, what do we do when somebody betrays a trust with us? Do we immediately write them off, punish them, fire them, and fire them as friends? No, we probably do not. We probably, if we know this person really well, we want to retain that friendship, we call the person privately and we talk to them and we tell them how it impacted us, how it impacted others, and that we hope that they will not ever do it again. So if they do it again, then we have to ask ourselves that question all over again. And generally, most of us say, oh, this person really a slow learner. Maybe they didn't get it the first time. But if they do it a third time, then we do fire them as friends. We do not want to keep them around because we frankly can't trust that they won't do this again. They've done it 3 times now. So I think that's, as a general rule of thumb, looking at them as human beings. Maybe they made a mistake. Let's make sure that they understand the values and the norms of this organization. Let's talk about this. Let's have a conversation. Second time, there are going to be some serious consequences. And if it happens a third time, that's it.
And so I love what one of the things that you're really saying there, Jim, is that can we treat this as a learning opportunity?
Yes.
And what I would add to what you said is I would be curious if I were running the organization, why the person felt the need to go outside of the company. I'll give you a great example. I don't know if any of you remember when Alaska Airlines had that crash off the coast of Los Angeles of that MD-80, because the elevator, which is the thing that keeps the plane level, the maintenance had been done improperly and passed some shoddy maintenance, and the plane crashed, killing 100 and something people, including a lot of Alaska Airlines employees. Afterwards, a number of Alaska Airlines employees started going to the media talking about a culture of expediency in the maintenance facilities, pressure to get things out of the hangar before they were ready. I happened to be on a flight about a month later, and was a kind of frightening flight, same kind of plane, and I'm thinking, I hope they did the maintenance. And I happened to strike up a conversation with the lead flight attendant. And she said, I told her what I did for a living. She said, let me show you a letter the CEO just sent out. And he just had sent out a letter to the employees saying, I know many people have gone to the media with concerns about what's happening in the company, but we need to keep these things in the family. These are family issues, not public issues. And she held up that letter to me and she said, when I read this letter, I knew why it was even more important for us to go to the media. Because I knew that these conversations were not welcome inside the company because of the tone of the letter. So I think the first thing is, in that situation, I'd be curious why that I'd assume goodwill at first and wonder if other people have gone to the media, and is it because there are issues we can't talk about inside the company? Because there may actually be a corporate culture issue also going on that's more profound than that employee. We don't know without knowing the situation, but I'd also be curious about that if I were leaving the company.
Absolutely. Those moments of learning. So part of that initial conversation, you cannot deny if what the questioner wrote, and in it he suggests that people viewed it as a betrayal of trust. Other employees viewed it as a betrayal of trust. You can't deny that.
Nope.
You have to face that fact too. And so it's a moment of learning around trust, and it's a moment also of finding out what motivated you to do this. Why did you do that? That's part of that initial conversation. And allowing that individual to express openly why he or she did that may help then to create a context in which that will not happen again.
So, Jim, I'm going to channel Jim Cramer. You know, some of you may watch Jim Cramer occasionally on Mad Money. I watch it mostly for entertainment, not to decide how to invest. And Cramer has something called the lightning round, which is you ask a question and he gives you like a quick answer. So, Jim, since we have a lot of questions, let's do a little lightning round here. All right. So, and we'll take turns. So let's go. By the way, somebody said in the chat room, asked me, well, you know, how come I didn't talk about Clinton blaming other people? And let me say this, this idea of blaming other people is not just about Trump. Gene Twenge at San Diego State University has been studying over the last 3.5 decades university students in the United States to find out whether they are more internally or externally oriented, meaning do they tend to think they manifested what's happening in their lives, or do they think others manifested it on them? Every decade, we're becoming more a society of what I call outies, figuring somebody else did this, not me. So Trump is just the latest example of something that is actually rampant in the society. So I only use him as the latest example of what in fact is rampant on all sides of the aisle. Just look at who's blaming who for the stimulus not getting done, and you know that nobody's taking responsibility. So I appreciated the comment. So Jim, here, how do leaders need to lead going into 2021? And more importantly, what do they need to do for post the pandemic in terms of leadership? So again, lightning round answer.
Well, let me just say this, John. The context of leadership changes continuously. It never stays the same, but the content of leadership is rather stable. So what you do as a leader today and what you do next year in December is going to be pretty much the same thing. As a leader, the behaviors are rather consistent. We've found over the years that these behaviors have held up for now over 37 years of doing research on these practices, that they still are as valid today as they were 37 years ago. And we're going to bet that they're going to be valid and reliable behaviors in the future. So we have to apply them then to a context, whatever that context may be, and figure out how we model the way, how we inspire a shared vision, how we challenge the process, how we enable others to act, and how we encourage the heart to use our 5 practices in that context.
I love, by the way, Ken Blanchard, one of our mutual friends, said about Jim and Barry's work, because they've been studying this for all these decades, asking people, what does good leadership look like? And he says, what do you call something that you study for 30 years in many different countries, and it's the same answer for 30 years? He said, you call it the truth. And so like the truths about leadership don't change, but the context and applying it does. So I appreciate that. Here's another lightning round question for me. Dr. Izzo, would love to hear from you briefly on the 100-0 and your work on sustainability and environment. 100-0, simple concept that I've been teaching, and Rox and I have been teaching for many years. 100-0, 100% responsibility, 0 excuses. I focus on what I can do and the part I'm playing 100% of the time. And I don't focus on the things I can't do or the barriers, because those are only excuses that may be true but aren't useful. Because if I focus on them, I will not lean into my power. I'll lean into my lack of power. So that's what the 100-0 is. Something I've been talking about for many years and got a lot of companies using it. Sustainability and environment, I think many of you have been following my work and life know that for really almost 40 years now, I've been incredibly concerned about our relationship with the earth and the sustainability of what we're doing. In our one lifetime, we have done incredible damage to the thing that gave us life. And so I have continued to be passionate about plastic in the ocean, about companies' role in tackling sustainability, and it's been a lifelong passion of mine, and I'm encouraged to see we're making a lot of progress, and yet we have so much further still to go. But thanks for asking. It's an issue I've been caring about for a long time, and where I think each one of us plays a part by being leaders. We won't solve climate change in the UN. We'll solve it in our personal lives by making choices and buying from companies that are tackling these issues. So Jim, another lightning round question. Thoughts regarding leadership effectiveness during virtual times? Our organization is concerned about the impact on the pandemic and the loss of one-on-one engagement. So any suggestion for leaders in these more virtual times we're living in?
Yeah, so actually there was early on in the pandemic when people started to move towards virtual, surprisingly productivity and engagement went up. And so people were saying, oh, well, why are we so worried about this virtual stuff? It actually makes people more productive and more engaged, provided that they're part of a team they can trust. So that was one of the conditions. As the pandemic has gone on, however, and we've had to live with this more and more, particularly in education, we've found that it's not the answer, the sole answer. So what we'll be moving toward will be some kind of hybrid where we'll use the technology, much as we're using it here, to reach out to the world when we need to do that. But when it comes to creating effective teams, trusting teams, we'll need to be more face-to-face as best we can during these kinds of times. And also, we're learning how to use technology more appropriately. For example, one of the things that happens with virtual technology is people do want to get right to work. A lot of the chit chat and stuff that happens doesn't happen on virtual calls. People that get right to work, we got an hour, let's get right to work. That ends up being a mistake. We should go back to what we do as human beings when we first see someone. Well, how are you? How was your weekend? How's the family? What's going on with you? Let's have a cup of coffee and chat. So some return to, and even using this technology, to some more socializing and learning more about each person. Perhaps it's each person gets a turn once a week to talk about themselves and things that they are doing currently and things that are on their mind. So ways in which we can return to more of that high touch context, even when we are virtual. So we're still learning. I'm sure some books will be written about this experience and more effectively use this technology and ways in which it both serves our health and well-being, as well as makes us engaged, trusting, and productive in the workforce.
Jim, you're so right about one of the dangers of this technology is it drives us to task. We get right to task. So here's two practical applications of what Jim was saying. One is Zoom has this wonderful feature where you can break people into groups of 2 or 3 randomly. And why not if you got a big team, why not begin by if it's a big team, might be groups of 3, groups of 2, just take a few minutes and connect with someone. Suddenly I'm connecting with people, give them an interesting question to explore. Could be about what you're grateful for in spite of these tough times, of what the pandemic has served up for you in terms of your own sense of self, something you're proud of that's happened recently, person you admire the most in your life, or just take a minute and connect. The other thing, at the University of British Columbia, where I co-founded this center 5 years ago, is that we have a once a month coffee meeting, where instead of a staff meeting, we have a weekly staff meeting. It's just a coffee meeting where everyone gets a cup of coffee or whatever you're drinking, and we just have no topic. There's no agenda. And we go where people want to go with it. And some really rich things, both personally and team-wise, have come out of not allowing this to drive you into that pure task focus, like you said. Here's another one that's, I think, a good question that maybe both of us can talk about, Jim, because we both referenced Carol Dweck's work. I've heard that I heard this praise for effort, so people take more risks. Is there a right balance of efforts versus results? And I'll take a first quick stab at it, Jim, and I love your input on it as well. For me, I always say, I did a session this morning with a group of CEOs, and I said, it's about praise for effort and results. So it's not that we're walking away from praising results or focusing on results. Results are important. It's that when we only praise results, we train people to play it safe, to set lower goals so they can achieve those results and look good, or over achieve them. If we only praise results, it means that when there's learning, then we really don't have that opportunity to explore what we learned in that opportunity there. So it is a fine balance. Results still matter, but what we need to understand is an organization that praises only results, people will learn to play it safe. Because that goes back to Carol Dweck's fascinating study with elementary school students when they gave them puzzles and either praised them for being smart or praised them for their effort, no matter what their score was. Those praised for being smart would then choose an easier puzzle so they could keep looking smart. Those praised for effort chose the harder puzzle so they could learn more, because after all, I'm being praised for trying, not just for my score. And so I think there's a lot to learn there. Jim, your quick answer, what's the balance?
Well, I think, Carol Dweck's work is on mindset. It's about beliefs. What do you believe about yourself and other people? And so the first place to start is examining your beliefs. If I say to myself, I'm not capable of fill in the blank, I'm not capable of doing a better job at public speaking, you won't engage in learning. When you're called upon to publicly speak, you'll probably decline the invitation because you're afraid you'll embarrass yourself and make a mistake. But if you say, oh, that's a skill that I can learn and I can improve. And hey, everybody makes mistakes when they first start doing something new. And if I embarrass myself, I'll just laugh about it and have everybody else laugh with me. Then you are more likely to try to do better at public speaking, and in fact, do better at public speaking as a result. The same is true for leading. If I say to myself, I'm not very good at inspiring a shared vision, and so I'll delegate that to somebody else. That, by the way, I have this thing about the strengths movement. I know that people do better and are more engaged when they focus on strengths, but we can't say that we can delegate leading to somebody else if we want to be a leader. We need to also learn certain sets of skills and abilities, even if it's difficult and even if we won't become the best at what we do. We talk about leadership as a pentathlon. We have 5 practices. And in a pentathlon, you can't say, well, I'm not going to compete in that practice because I'm not very good at it. And so if we approach it as something we can get better at, then we're much more likely to put forth effort to do better at that. One other thing, Carol recommends playing a little mental trick with ourselves. Whenever you find yourself saying, I'm not very good at public speaking, follow it by 1 3-letter word, yet. I'm not very good at public speaking yet. And that just little mental trick tricks you into looking at it very differently than a fixed mindset person who would stop before the yet.
Yeah, amen, Jim. So I'm going to take one more question in a minute. Our time's almost out, but I want to just put a thing up on the screen here just for you guys. First of all, I want to obviously thank you for being here, and we are going to take a couple more questions before we go. But as we said, in the next 24 to 48 hours, you're going to get an excerpt from each of our 2 new books, as well as a link to the recording, which you can feel free to share with others, as much as you like. We would welcome that. Ainsley's also going to put in the chat. I'm doing two things I've never done before. I'm doing a second edition of a book, and I'm doing a free book club for 4 sessions starting next week. If you buy the book, because of course you can't be in the book club, you didn't buy the book. It's not about the dollar I'm going to get from buying the book, but no sense coming to the book club if you're not reading the book. So and Ainsley's going to put the link in the chat. If you just order the book on Amazon or Indigo or wherever you buy books, Barnes and Noble, and just send us your name and address. It starts next week, and you can be a part of the book club. It's just a virtual book club we're doing to really have an opportunity to give people a chance to interact. Something I've never done before, but it's going to be fun. So that will be in the chat room. Marion Baker, old friend, asked the question, again, not old, but a friend of many years, asked the question. I think I'll end with this one. I'm curious to hear Jim and John's voices on what are the top qualities of new paradigm leadership versus old story, not sustainable. How do millennials and boomers respect each other and evolve together? But let's kind of go with that maybe first question, which I think is an interesting one. So much hasn't changed about leadership, Jim. But in your mind, what's one thing that has changed or an emerging competency, perhaps, that leaders are going to need that may represent a new style of leadership? And then I'll answer that as well.
Well, one of the most significant current issues that leaders are going to have to deal with is a deeper understanding and more awareness around and intervention in diversity, equity, and inclusion. There is no doubt that we have to address this issue inside organizations and inside our countries and our communities. And we need to learn the skills and the knowledge associated with it. It's all part of treating individuals with dignity and respect, which is a question we've been asking for 37 years. And we consistently get that the more people treat others with dignity and respect, the more effective they're seen as leaders, and also the more effective they are at engaging others. And so we just have to go deeper into that and learn more. We may be thinking we're doing it well, but it's very clear that we're not doing it well with certain groups. And I'd say that's at the top of our agendas for 2021. Beyond, of course, I think something that we're learning in spades that we just have to keep relearning. Leaders set examples. They can set bad examples or good examples. And the example we set as leaders has a powerful impact on other people's behavior. So let's make sure that in the process of doing all of these things, whether it's about diversity, equity, inclusion, or wearing masks, that we set the proper example ourselves if we're going to expect that of others.
Yeah, I agree, Jim, about these social issues. An interesting study recently where they asked Gen Z, the youngest consumers, what they wanted from brands. And two most interesting things was they wanted brands to take more bold stands on issues, even if it meant they might make some people angry. And I think that one of the things today is that people are really asking leaders to take more chances, not to play it safe. And that goes like both, you know, and this is not just about like a progressive issue. I always think of like Chick-fil-A as a company that may not share some of my values, but they've created a tremendous loyalty by being willing to have some people not like them. When Nike featured Colin Kaepernick, they knew some people wouldn't like them, but they knew some people would love them. And I think one of the changes is that those brands and leaders who play it safe now will not be rewarded. This is an age where people are expecting brands and companies and leaders to authentically stand for something, even if it means someone may not like you, even if it means that you're not in that middle of the road. And research shows, by the way, people who buy from us because of our values or work for us because of our values are up to 5 times more loyal than people who work for us or buy from us because of our product or our employment contract. So if we can connect to people's values, which means we have to be bold, then we have a bond much deeper than the bond of practical expediency, which is ultimately a very weak bond. As soon as the product goes on sale or someone offers you a bigger salary, you're gone. But if I share your values and I have that bond, and leaders got to get better at that. It's a glue that's very different than the one we're used to working with. Jim, can you hang around and answer a few more questions, or do you got to go?
About 5 minutes, but
Okay, 5 minutes. Let's just see if we can get, and if you have to go, we'd love having you. Feel free to go, but just for the sake of it, and again, the link for the book club is in the room. Let's just take a few more here. In your research, have you found that a few senior positional, oops, it's disappearing on me. In your research, have you found that a few senior positional leaders do not understand systems thinking? So many silos in organizations. Jim, a quick lightning round answer. Again, we'll end at 11:05.
That's not an area that I do research on, John. So systems thinking is not something that we do research on. So I really can't answer that question.
Fair enough. I've spent a fair amount of time with Peter Senge and Otto Scharmer at MIT, and I will say this: like you, Jim, it's not what I study for a living, but I do think systems thinking is really something leaders have to think about, because as Peter Senge says, the very definition of a complex problem is one that what's happening is not what any of the individuals would desire, but it's happening anyway. And so that requires you to understand that sometimes systems create things the individuals don't want. I'd be interested to know the keys to successful leadership development, training, environment, reinforcement. Jim, if you would say one thing in your years of experience that makes leadership, this is probably a great question to end on. What do you think is most important for leadership development to actually be sticky and sustainable in a leader's life? So that's a great question.
We wrote a book called Learning Leadership, and Barry Posner and I, and there are some suggestions in that book about it. But I would say I'd go back to where we started in this conversation. You talked about taking personal responsibility. I talked about believing in yourself. I think that it all starts with a belief that you can, believing that you can. And then you have to have personally aspirational goals set for yourself. And then you need to challenge yourself to move beyond what you're currently doing, even if it's uncomfortable, in order to learn those new skills and achieve those aspirational goals. And probably more importantly than any of those is that you have to engage support. We have learned that people learn better when and more effectively when they have a coach, when they have a mentor, when they have social support around them. And so engaging support and recognizing you cannot do this alone. If you're going to become a better leader, you're going to become better at stepping out and stepping up, you need to have support around you, and you need a shoulder to lean on, somebody to talk to, and some coaching. And lastly, it takes disciplined practice. You really need to practice. You're going to get better at leading. So those are, at least at an individual level, things that we can do to develop ourselves as leaders.
Yeah, and Jim, just to reinforce what you said, the research shows people are about 4 times more likely to make a change if they're accountable to even one other person who's trying to make similar changes. And when we do our programs that last over time, we always have people have an accountability partner. And when we survey people and say, those of you who actually met with your partner, did it accelerate your learning? The average score is about 87% of people, almost 9 out of 10, say it accelerated my learning to be accountable to someone else. The other thing is I would offer you is that the virtual learning environment gives us an opportunity that is hard to replicate in the in-person world. And that is, in the in-person world, we do long sessions because it's practical. We take people to the hotel, we feed them lunch, we block out their day. which is a very bad way to learn in the big scheme of things, because you learn a one-time shot of inspiration or learning, no time to apply it or be accountable to anyone, and then you go back to your job. In the virtual world, why not break that learning up into 4 or 5 sessions where you get smaller chunks? You don't have the expense of sending people somewhere. They get to be accountable to someone else and integrate the learning in their real life and work, and then come back and have to talk about it. So I think that the virtual world is perfectly set up for the way people actually learn, which is in small increments, not in big bursts. So I think we'll eventually find that this may in fact be a better way to practically lead people down a path of learning than the one burst, go to the hotel, stay for a day, experience that we've been doing for many years. Anyway, Jim, so honored to be with you. I'll give Jim the greatest compliment that I get sometimes. I love when people say, I love your work, or hey, blah, blah. Greatest compliment is people often say to me, you're the same person off stage as you are on. Jim is the same warm, beautiful human being that he is here and in his books in person. And I'm honored to call him a friend. And I wish you well, and I wish all of you well. Good to see so many of you. I'm sorry we couldn't take all your questions or talk personally, but thanks so much for joining us. And please get a copy of Jim's book. You'll love it. It's a great new addition to his great library. Jim, any final words?
I would just share with everyone the secret to success in life. And thank you, John, for your very, very gracious comment. Love you, brother. When anyone asks me, said John Stanford, one of the people we interviewed at the time, was a major general in the U.S. Army, became superintendent of schools in Seattle Unified School District after he retired. He said, when anyone ever asked me the question about how do we develop ourselves as leaders, I tell them I have the secret to success in life. And he went on to say, the secret to success is stay in love. Staying in love gives you the fire to really ignite other people, to see inside other people, to have a greater desire to get things done than other people. A person who is not in love doesn't really feel the kind of excitement that helps them to get ahead and lead others and to achieve. I don't know any other fire, any other thing in life that is more positive and exhilarating a feeling than love is. Now, I didn't expect to hear that from a major general, but when you think about it, that is, isn't it, the secret to success in life? And it's also the secret to success in leadership. So John, thanks much. Thanks everyone for participating.
Jim, what I love about that is, and love is not just an emotion. Sometimes you got to work to stay in love. And that means you stay in the game and keep trying even if you fail. So thank you, everyone. Jim, thank you. Beautiful to see all of you, especially so many friends I haven't seen in a while. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us, and new friends as well. Thank you. You'll get the recording and the link within 24 to 48 hours. Thanks so much again.
Thanks much. Thank you. Bye, guys.